My fiancé skipped our wedding for my sister, so I married the mafia boss who came for me. The text message arrived at 11:47 on the morning of Genevieve Ashcombe's wedding. It was not from Wesley. It was from Mallory. He's with me. He had to come. You know how he is. You've always understood before. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Genevieve read it 3 times in her bridal suite, standing in $4,000 worth of ivory silk, her veil pinned carefully into her hair that it had taken the stylist 40 minutes to get it right. The flowers were downstairs. The photographer was downstairs. 312 guests were downstairs, seated in gilded chairs, waiting for music that would never start. And Mallory Wren, the woman who had been raised as her sister, who had grown up in the Ashcombe house, while Genevieve grew up in a home that nobody should have called, a home had sent her a text message explaining why the groom wasn't coming. If you have ever stood in a room full of everything you have ever wanted and felt the floor disappear beneath you, then you already know what Genevieve felt in that moment. If you haven't, stay with me, because what she did next will either make you furious or it will make you understand something true about what a woman is capable of when she has finally run out of patience. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and come with me to the end of this story. I promise you, you have never seen anything like what happens next. Drop your city and country in the comments right now. I want to know how far this story travels. Genevieve did not cry. That was the first thing. She had spent 7 years training herself not to cry over Mallory, and the muscle memory held even now, even in this dress, even with the florist's invoice still sitting on the vanity beside her lipstick. She read the message a 4th time, set the phone face down on the table, and sat on the edge of the settee carefully, because the dress cost more than her first car, and some habits survive catastrophe. She sat there for 4 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock on the wall. Then she picked up the phone again and called Wesley. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She typed, "Wesley, call me back, right now." 3 gray dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Then nothing. The maid of honor, a woman named Petra, who had been Genevieve's college roommate and who had flown in from London specifically for this weekend, knocked twice and opened the door. She took one look at Genevieve's face, and her own face did something complicated. "Tell me," Petra said. "Mallory had a car accident." Petra's jaw tightened. "How bad?" "Bad enough for Wesley to leave on our wedding morning. Not bad enough for her to send anything other than a text." Petra crossed the room and picked up Genevieve's phone without asking. She read the message. She set the phone down with the specific controlled care of someone who wanted very badly to throw it. "I'll go downstairs and don't say anything yet." Genevieve looked up at her. "Give me 5 minutes, Jen. 5 minutes, Petra. Please." Petra closed the door behind her. Genevieve sat in the silence of a bridal suite that smelled like white roses and hairspray and 3 months of planning. And she thought about the first time this had happened. She had been 24 years old. She and Wesley had been together for 8 months. They had plans for a weekend in Vermont, nothing significant. Just a cabin, just 2 people who were falling in love and wanted time without the city around them. On the Friday evening they were supposed to leave, Mallory called Wesley to say she was having a panic attack and needed him there. Wesley drove to Mallory's apartment. Genevieve drove to Vermont alone. Told herself it was fine, told herself she understood, and sat on the porch of a rented cabin watching the sun go down over the mountains by herself. She had told herself then, this is who Wesley is. He protects people. That's not a flaw. She had been so willing to call it a virtue. She thought about the 2nd time and the 5th time and the 11th time. She had stopped counting at some point. That was its own kind of damage, not the individual moments, but the way she had trained herself to absorb them quietly, to file them away, to add them to a private ledger that she never showed anyone, because showing them would mean admitting how heavy the ledger had gotten. 7 years. She had given Wesley Carradine 7 years of patience, and she was 31 years old, and she was sitting in an ivory dress in an empty room while he sat in a hospital beside Mallory Wren, who had always needed him more than Genevieve was allowed to. She picked up her phone. She did not call Wesley again. She opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she had never expected to dial. A name she had saved 3 years ago after a charity gala fire that most of the city had spent years trying to forget. She had saved it because the man who owned it had pressed a card into her hand while she was still coughing smoke out of her lungs, while half the Marquette Hotel ballroom was still flickering orange, and he had looked at her the way people look at other people when they mean what they're about to say. If you ever need anything, he had told her, you call that number. She had thought at the time that she would never need anything badly enough to make that call. She had been wrong. She pressed dial. It rang twice. Genevieve Ashcombe. His voice was unhurried. It was the voice of a man who never sounded surprised, who had calibrated himself long ago against the appearance of being caught off guard. I was beginning to think I'd imagined giving you that card. Alistair. She heard her own voice and was surprised by how steady it was. I need a favor. A brief silence, not uncomfortable. More like he was giving her room. Name it. She looked at herself in the vanity mirror across the room. She looked at the veil and the dress and the roses pinned near her collarbone that the florist had spent an hour arranging, and she thought about 312 people sitting in gilded chairs, waiting for a wedding. I need a groom, she said. I need one in about 35 minutes. I understand completely if that's, I'll be there in 40. The line went quiet, not disconnected quiet, like he was already moving. Genevieve set the phone down. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, not quite relief, not quite grief, not quite the reckless calm that comes right before a person does the most consequential thing they've ever done. Some combination of all three that didn't have a clean name. She picked up her lipstick and fixed the corner of her mouth where she'd pressed her lips together too hard. Then she called Petra back in. I need you to keep everyone seated, Genevieve said. Tell them there's a delay. Don't tell them anything else. Petra stared at her. Jen, what are you doing? Possibly the stupidest thing I've ever done. Genevieve straightened her veil. Or the smartest. I genuinely cannot tell yet. That is not an answer. Go downstairs, Petra. Please. And if a man named Alistair Crowe arrives and asks where the bride is, send him up. Petra's expression went through several phases very quickly: confusion, recognition, alarm, and finally, something that looked almost like awe. She had grown up in New York. She knew the name. Genevieve Ashcombe, she said slowly. I know. Do you know what I know exactly what he is. Genevieve met her eyes in the mirror. I also know he picks up the phone. Go. Petra went. Genevieve sat down again and folded her hands in her lap and waited, which was something she was extremely, exhaustingly good at doing, though she had decided, somewhere in the last 10 minutes, that she was going to stop being good at it. Alistair Crowe arrived in 38 minutes. He was not what the tabloids made him look like. Or rather, he was exactly what the tabloids made him look like, but in a way that the photographs never fully captured. He was 51 years old and built like a man who had spent decades being very careful about what he allowed near him, that particular kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from discipline, from learning early that the wrong movement at the wrong moment has consequences. He wore a dark suit that had not been purchased for a wedding, and he had the expression of a man who had redirected his entire morning without explaining himself to a single person. He knocked once on the suite door and opened it without waiting, which told Genevieve something about him that she filed away for later. He looked at her. She looked at him. You look like you've been crying, he said. I haven't. I know, I said you look like it. There's a difference. He came into the room and closed the door behind him. Tell me what happened, she told him. Efficiently, without embellishment, the way she wrote investigative copy: subject, action, consequence. Wesley, Mallory, the text, the voicemail. 7 years distilled into 90 seconds because she had gotten very good at making things smaller than they were in order to carry them. Alistair listened without interrupting, which was rarer than people understood. He stood near the window with his hands in his pockets, and he listened to all of it, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. What do you want out of today? He said finally. She blinked. What? Not out of the marriage, not out of Wesley. Today, this afternoon. What do you actually want? Nobody had asked her that in a very long time. She had to think about it, which was its own painful thing, that a simple question required effort. I want to walk down that aisle, she said. I want 300 people to see that I am not going to stand into this room and disappear quietly. She stopped, and something moved across her face that she didn't have a word for. I want just once for someone to actually show up. Alistair nodded slowly. I should tell you, he said, that I'm not going to pretend the ceremony is legally binding. I won't do that to you. Downstairs, I'll be clear with the guests that you'll decide later whether any of this is real. She stared at him. But I'll stand there, he said. And I'll mean it while I'm standing there. That part I can promise you. Genevieve Ashcombe, who had not cried in the 40 minutes since she read Mallory's text message, felt something sting behind her eyes that she refused to allow any further. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Let's go. She would remember, later, the particular quality of the silence when the chapel doors opened. She had imagined this moment many times, over the months of planning the music, the rustle of 300 people, rising, the familiar shape of Wesley at the end of the aisle with the expression she'd rehearsed him wearing in her mind. She had imagined the controlled tears and the flowers and the way the afternoon light came through the chapel's east windows at that particular hour. None of that happened the way she'd imagined. What happened was, the doors opened, and the music started, because Petra had apparently gotten to the organist with enough time to prepare, and Genevieve walked into the chapel on Alistair Crowe's arm, and the silence that fell over 300 people was not the reverent silence of a wedding. It was the stunned silence of a room full of people trying to understand what they were seeing. She heard the whispers start immediately. She caught fragments. Who is that? Is that Crowe? Where is Wesley? What is happening? And she kept her chin level and her eyes forward and her hand steady on Alistair's arm, which was solid in the way of things that had decided not to move. He walked slowly. She realized he was giving her time to breathe, giving the moment room to exist without rushing through it. That choice was not accidental. Halfway down the aisle, she heard someone in the third pew say Alistair's name loudly enough that several heads turned. She felt Alistair's arm tighten, the smallest amount under her hand, not discomfort, she thought. Something else, like he was paying attention. They reached the altar. The officiant, a man named Reverend Hollis, who had been booked 8 months ago and who was clearly struggling to maintain professional composure, looked between them with the expression of a man who had performed several hundred weddings and never once prepared for this particular scenario. Alistair turned to the assembled guests before anyone could speak. I want to be honest with you, he said. His voice carried without effort, the voice of a man accustomed to rooms listening when he spoke. The man who was supposed to be here today made a different choice this morning. That is between him and his conscience. He paused. Genevieve will decide what she wants to do about any of this. That decision belongs to her. What I'm here to do is make sure she doesn't have to stand alone while she figures it out. The chapel was absolutely silent. Genevieve looked at the 300 faces, turned toward her family, his colleagues, Wesley's business partners, the editors from her magazine, people she had known for decades, and people she'd met twice at engagement parties, and she felt something move through her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like herself. Let's continue, she said to Reverend Hollis. He continued. The ceremony was not what had been planned. The vows they exchanged were the generic ones from the ceremony program because neither of them had anything prepared, and Alistair said his with the careful specificity of someone choosing each word deliberately, and Genevieve said hers looking directly at him because that was the only face in the room she trusted at that exact moment to look back at her without calculation. When it was over, Alistair did not kiss her. He simply turned to the gathered guests and said, "Thank you for being here," in a tone that closed the room like a period ends a sentence. By the time the reception photographs made their way onto the entertainment blogs, that evening every major outlet in New York was running a version of the same headline. The story was impossible to ignore: a mafia boss standing in for a missing groom, A bride who had walked down the aisle anyway, a chapel full of witnesses who couldn't agree on what they'd seen. At a hospital across the city, Wesley Carradine sat beside Mallory's bed watching her sleep, his phone balanced on his knee, notifications building in a stack he hadn't opened yet. He didn't know yet. He would by morning. And at the reception that unfolded in the Ashcombe family's usual too-expensive style, Alistair found Genevieve standing near the terrace door, holding a glass of champagne she hadn't touched, looking out at the city below with the expression of someone who had just walked off a very high cliff and hadn't finished deciding yet whether that had been an act of courage or catastrophe. He stood beside her. "You don't have to make any decisions tonight," he said. She turned to look at him. "You flew here without a plan." "I had a plan. What was it?" He looked out at the city. "Make sure you weren't alone. That was the plan." He paused. "The rest of it, the agreement, the legal arrangement, whether this becomes anything real, that can wait until you've slept and had coffee and decided what you actually want. None of that expires tonight." She looked at him for a long moment. "Most people," she said carefully, "would have asked what they were getting out of this." "Most people," he said, "didn't owe you a debt." She thought about the fire. She sounded like green wood splitting. She thought about the smoke in her lungs and the way she had pulled him back from the doorway that was already collapsing, acting on instinct before her brain caught up to what her body was doing. She thought about waking up in the hospital the next morning with a headline on her phone about a charity gala disaster and a single-line text from a number she didn't recognize yet. "You kept your head." That's rarer than people think. She had thought it was an odd thing to say. Now she understood it differently. "I'll look at the agreement," she said. "Whatever you have in mind." He reached into his jacket, and she noticed, with the sharp eye of someone who had spent a decade in investigative journalism, that he had brought it, that he had had it ready. She filed that away too. The document was 4 pages. Clean paragraphs, no ambiguity, the kind of legal language that said we have thought about every eventuality without saying it directly. Separate finances, her career untouched, his operations contained entirely to his world. Either party could exit with 60 days' notice. No expectation of physical intimacy. No public performance requirements beyond what both parties agreed to in advance. It was, she thought, the most honest document anyone had ever handed her. She read it twice on the terrace while the reception noise drifted through the glass behind them. "You had this prepared," she said. "Yes." She looked up. "How long ago?" He held her gaze. "Long enough." That answer landed somewhere in her chest, and she chose, deliberately, not to examine it yet. There were enough things to examine tonight. She would be careful about which ones she opened. "I'll have my lawyer look at it," she said. "That's the correct answer," he said. She handed it back to him. Below the terrace, New York spread itself out in lights and noise, and the particular careless density of a city that had no interest in anyone's private disaster. Somewhere out there, Wesley was sitting in a hospital room. Somewhere out there, Mallory was already calculating. Genevieve didn't know that part yet. She would. But tonight, for the first time in 7 years, she stood somewhere she had not expected to stand, beside someone she had not expected to trust, and found that the ground under her feet, despite everything, felt more solid than it had in a very long time. She picked up the champagne and finally took a sip. It was the wrong vintage, and she didn't care at all. The morning after the wedding, Genevieve woke up in the guest suite of a penthouse she did not own, in a building she had only seen from the outside, wearing the oversized dress shirt that Petra had found in a closet and handed her the night before without comment. For approximately 4 seconds, she forgot everything. Then she remembered. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, high white, the kind of architectural, nothing that expensive construction produces, and she did the inventory that had become a reflex over 7 years of managing situations she hadn't chosen. Where was she? What had happened? What needed to happen next? The answers arrived in order. Alistair Crowe's penthouse, Midtown. She had married a man she barely knew in front of 300 witnesses. She needed coffee, a lawyer, and probably a complete reassessment of the last decade of her life. She got up. The kitchen was the kind of kitchen that belonged to someone who employed people to use it on his behalf, immaculate, generously stocked, and possessed of an espresso machine that required a brief moment of orientation before she understood its logic. She was standing at the counter waiting for the shot to pull when she heard footsteps behind her. Alistair was already dressed. Not formally dark trousers, a shirt with the collar open, but with the settled quality of a man who had been awake for some time and had not wasted it. "There's a proper coffee if you want it," he said, moving to the cabinet beside her and producing a second cup without asking whether she wanted one. "Found the machine. I see that." He watched the espresso pull with the idle attention of someone whose mind was operating on a separate track entirely. "Your phone has been active since about 6. She looked at him. "You checked my phone?" The notifications were audible through the wall. He set the second cup beside hers. "I didn't look at it." She picked up her phone from where she'd left it on the counter. 47 notifications. 11 missed calls, 3 from her mother, 2 from her father, 4 from numbers she didn't recognize, 1 from her editor at North Star News, and 1 from Wesley. She stared at Wesley's name for a moment. Then she put the phone face down on the counter, picked up her espresso, and drank half of it in one go. "He called," Alistair said. It was not a question. "Yes. Are you going to call back?" Eventually, she set the cup down. "Not this morning." He nodded and said nothing further, which she was beginning to understand was a specific quality of his, the ability to let a silence exist without needing to fill it. Most people couldn't do that. Most people, in the presence of a silence, started talking to kill it. Alistair let silences stand like furniture. She called her lawyer at 7:30. Her lawyer, a woman named Carmen Vidal, who had handled Genevieve's affairs since her first publishing contract, and who had the particular unflappable competence of someone who had seen everything twice, listened to a summary of the evening without interrupting, and then said, "Send me the document. I'll have notes by noon. I need it fast." "I know what fast means, Jen. Send it." Alistair forwarded the agreement to Carmen's office without being asked, which told Genevieve he had either anticipated this or had already prepared for it, and she could not decide which of those possibilities was more unsettling. At 8:15, her mother called for the 4th time. Genevieve answered. "What were you thinking?" Her mother's voice was not the voice of a woman asking a question. It was the voice of a woman delivering a verdict she had already written. "Do you have any idea what people are saying? Do you have any idea what this looks like for the family?" "Good morning, Mom." "Don't you good morning me. Wesley has been calling your father since 6 o'clock. He's devastated, Genevieve. Mallory's in the hospital and you—" "Mallory." Genevieve set her espresso cup down with careful precision. "Mallory is in the hospital. Mallory, who sent me a text message on my wedding morning to explain why my fiancé wasn't coming. That Mallory. She was injured. I know what we were told." Pause. Her mother's pauses had a specific texture, the texture of a woman recalibrating, choosing her next angle. "What does that mean?" "It means I know what we were told." Genevieve kept her voice even. "Mom, listen to me carefully. I am not going to discuss this on the phone. If you want to have a conversation, you can have one. In person. When I'm ready. And when will that be?" "When I'm ready." She ended the call. She stood very still for a moment, her hand flat on the cool counter, and breathed through the particular specific anger of talking to her mother, the kind of anger that had nowhere to land because it was not one thing but 1,000 small, accumulated things that had calcified over decades into something she no longer tried to name. From the other end of the kitchen, Alistair said, "The media is outside." She looked up. How many? 8 outlets as of 20 minutes ago. Probably more by now. He moved to the window and glanced down, not close to the glass, just near enough. They'll be there for at least 2 days. After that, it depends on what story they decide to run. Genevieve thought about this practically. She was an investigative producer. She understood media cycles the way a sailor understood, whether not perfectly, not with certainty, but well enough to read the signs. They'll run whatever feeds the most reaction. Either the romantic version or the scandal version. The scandal version is already moving. He turned from the window. There's a piece on the Courier site from last night. They're calling it a publicity arrangement. Unnamed sources. She felt her stomach tighten. Whose sources? That's what I'd like to know. His voice was neutral, but there was something underneath it that she registered, without being able to fully name a quality of attention, precise and cool, the way a person focuses when they have already begun calculating. She thought about who had been at the wedding. 300 people. Her family's social circle, Wesley's business associates, her professional contacts, and the Ashcombe family's various attached entities. The number of people with access to a reporter's phone was not small. It could be anyone, she said. It could be, he agreed. But not everyone would know to frame it as a publicity arrangement. That's specific language. Someone with familiarity. She looked at him. He met her eyes and said nothing more, and she understood that he was leaving the conclusion for her to draw rather than drawing it for her, and she wasn't sure yet whether that was courtesy or something more deliberate. Carmen called at 11:45 with notes on the agreement. "It's clean," Carmen said, which from Carmen was approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. "Unusually clean, actually. No buried clauses, no ambiguous language around assets. The exit terms are straightforward and don't favor either party. Whoever wrote this was either very honest or very confident." "Probably both," Genevieve said. "The separation of finances is airtight. Your career property stays yours. His business interests are walled off entirely. There's actually a clause that explicitly prohibits him from using your professional reputation in connection with any of his operations, which is more protection than I'd typically expect him to offer." Carmen paused. "Jen, I've seen a lot of contracts. This one was written by someone who wanted you to feel safe signing it." Genevieve looked out the window of the guest suite where she'd retreated for the call. The city below was doing its indifferent thing. "Is that a recommendation?" "It's an observation. The recommendation is, if you sign it, make sure you know why you're signing it." "I know why." "Then sign it and come see me next week." Genevieve signed the agreement that afternoon. At the kitchen counter, Alistair across from her with his coffee, both of them conducting the entire process with the business-like composure of people who had agreed to be adults about something that was not in any obvious way an adult situation. He signed without reading it again. She noticed that. "You didn't reread it," she said. "I wrote it. I know what it says." She capped the pen. "You wrote it yourself?" "The legal language is my attorney's. The terms are mine." He collected both copies with the particular neatness of someone accustomed to managing documents that mattered. "I'll have these filed. We'll need to do the city clerk's office within the week for the legal registration." "I know how marriage works," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent. Wesley came to the building on day 3. Genevieve knew he was there before Alistair told her. She had seen the notification on her phone, the doorman's text, and she had sat with the knowledge for approximately 6 minutes before going to find Alistair in his office. A sound like green wood splitting, a room she had not previously entered, which turned out to be the kind of space that organized a person's understanding of who they were dealing with. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, actual books with broken spines, a desk that was working rather than decorative, and on the wall, beside the window, not art, but maps. So detailed, annotated, the kind of maps that someone uses rather than displays. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. "Wesley is downstairs," she said. Pause. Brief. "Do you want to see him?" "No." The answer came without hesitation, which surprised her slightly. She had expected to have to think about it. "But I think I should." "Those aren't the same thing." "I know they're not the same thing." She leaned against the doorframe. "If I don't see him now, he'll keep coming. He'll call my parents. He'll call my editor. He'll find a way to make himself the story." She knew Wesley. 7 years of Wesley had made her fluent in his particular rhythms. Better to do it once and be clear. Alistair looked at her for a moment. "Do you want me there?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "But I want you in the building." He nodded once. "Then I'll be in the building." She met Wesley in the lobby. He looked like he hadn't slept. His jacket was the wrong one, for the occasion casual. Something he'd grabbed in a hurry, and there was a quality to his face that she recognized. The face he made when he had convinced himself that he was the wronged party and was building toward a confrontation that he believed was justified. She had seen this face before. She had learned to manage it. She didn't manage it today. Jen. He moved toward her, and she stopped him with a look not deliberate, just the look that happened when she was not going to be managed in return. Don't, she said. He stopped. I just want to explain. Wesley. She kept her voice low. The lobby had a doorman and 2 building residents waiting for the elevator, and she was not interested in giving them a scene. I don't need an explanation. I know what happened. She needed me. She always needs you. The words came out flat. Not angry. Flat, which was worse. That's not new information. What I needed was for you to be there. You made a choice. I made a choice. Those choices are both done. He stared at her. You married him. You married Alistair Crowe. Do you understand what you've done? Yes. Jen, he dropped his voice. He's dangerous. You don't know what his business involves. You don't know the people he... I'm an investigative journalist, Wesley. I've been reporting on organized crime for 6 years. Don't explain dangerous to me. She held his gaze. We're done. I'm sorry it ended here. I'm not sorry it ended. His jaw worked. She watched it happen, the calculation, the pivot, the thing he did when one approach failed and he needed another one. Mallory didn't ask me to come. I want you to know that. Called because she was scared, and I went because that's who I am. I can't change who I am. I know you can't, she said. That's why I'm not asking you to. She turned and walked back to the elevator. Behind her, she heard him say her name once more, not a question, not really. More the sound a person makes when they realize something has finalized, and she pressed the elevator button and waited without turning around. The legal marriage happened on a Wednesday at the Manhattan City Clerk's office. Petra was there. Alistair brought one of his attorneys as a witness, a man named Gareth, who shook Genevieve's hand with professional warmth and said nothing beyond what was necessary, which she appreciated. Clerk was efficient and impersonal, and the entire process took 11 minutes. Afterward, on the sidewalk outside the clerk's office, Petra looked between them with the expression of someone assembling a very complicated puzzle under time pressure. Right, Petra said so. Lunch? Lunch, Alistair agreed, which was apparently all the social negotiation required. They went to a restaurant 2 blocks away, not fancy, the kind of place with good pasta and bad lighting and tables, close enough together that you had to keep your voice down. Genevieve ate most of her food, which surprised her. She had expected to have no appetite. Instead, she ate and listened to Alistair, and Petra established a specific careful rapport, the kind that forms between 2 people who are each, independently, trying to take the measure of the other, while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. It was fascinating in the way that watching 2 good poker players at the same table was fascinating. Petra, eventually, passed whatever test Alistair had been administering without either of them acknowledging that a test had occurred. On the walk back to the car, Petra dropped back a step and fell into stride beside Genevieve. He watches you, Petra said quietly, not accusingly, more the way she stated facts when she wanted Genevieve to have them. I know, Genevieve said, not in a controlling way. Petra appeared to search for the precise tracking way, like he's noting your position. I know. That could mean several things. I know that too. Petra was quiet for a half block. Are you scared? Genevieve considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. No, she said. That might be the most alarming thing about it. 2 weeks into the arrangement, Genevieve went back to work. North Star News occupied 4 floors of a building on 6th Avenue, and walking back into it felt like putting on a coat she'd left hanging for longer than planned, slightly wrong in the shoulders, at first, then settling. Her editor, a man named Doug Farron, who communicated primarily in half-sentences and had never, in Genevieve's experience, said anything sentimental, looked up when she came in and said, "You good?" "Good enough," she said. "Then sit down. We have a story." The story was not about her marriage. It was about a nonprofit network in the outer boroughs with inconsistent financials and a board of directors who couldn't agree on what their own organization did. Doug laid out the preliminary research, and Genevieve listened and asked 12 questions in 9 minutes, and Doug, who had been editing journalists for 22 years, made a note in the margin of his notebook and said, "Yeah, you're fine. Get started." She got started. But on the second day back, Sorting through background documentation on the nonprofit's funding structure, she found something that stopped her hand mid-reach for her coffee. One of the organizations connected to the nonprofit, a public relations consulting firm listed under a holding company, shared a registered address with a smaller entity she recognized from unrelated paperwork. She had seen that address before. She spent 40 minutes convincing herself that the recognition was coincidence. It was not coincidence. The address connected to a publicity management company that had, on several documented occasions, handled press strategy for the Ashcombe Family Foundation, the foundation that Mallory had been managing for the past 3 years. Genevieve sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling and let the shape of the thing form in the space behind her eyes, the way she always did when a story started showing its architecture. She had learned not to rush this part. Rushing it meant missing edges. She pulled the foundation's publicly filed tax documents, which were accessible to anyone who wanted them, and started reading. She did not call Alistair. Not yet. This was her work and her family, and she was not going to hand it to someone else to carry before she understood what she was carrying. She worked until 10:30 that night. When she got back to the penthouse, she had been going back each evening, which had become habit with the organic inevitability of water. Finding a channel, Alistair was at his desk, and he looked up when she came in, and something in his expression registered that her face was different than it had been this morning. "Long day," she said before he could ask. "Go eat," he said. "There's food in the kitchen. You didn't cook. Someone did. That's sufficient." She almost smiled. She went to the kitchen and found a covered plate and ate at the counter and thought about registered addresses and holding companies and the specific queasy feeling of beginning to see a shape in the dark that you were not yet prepared to name. The photographs leaked on a Friday. She heard about it from Carmen at 6:48 in the morning. Carmen, who called rather than texted when things were serious, and whose opening sentence was, "The marriage agreement is on 3 major sites." Full text. "I'm already talking to our litigation team." Genevieve sat up in bed. "Which sites?" Carmen told her. Coverage was what she expected from the content, sensationalized, strategically framed, designed to ignite the specific reactions that drove engagement. Ashcombe Crowe marriage fake. Sources confirm. Contract reveals staged wedding stunt. The framing was so clean, it was almost admirable in a purely technical sense, the language chosen to make the arrangement sound cynical, manipulative, a publicity exercise. Her name was used in every headline. So was Alistair's. She dressed in 4 minutes and walked to his office. He was already on the phone. He held up a single finger without looking up one moment and finished whatever he was saying in the clipped monosyllables of a man wrapping up a conversation that had been going on for some time. He ended the call and set the phone down. "You know," she said. "Since 5 this morning." He met her eyes. "Sit down." "I'd rather stand than stand." He leaned back in his chair. The document was filed. Only 3 people outside this penthouse had access to it. Carmen, Vidal, Gareth, and the city clerk's office. She thought about that. "You don't think it was Carmen?" "No, Gareth?" "No," he said it with the flatness of complete certainty. "Which leaves the clerk's office, which is a possibility." Or he stopped. "Or someone who shouldn't have had access did," she said. Yes, she thought about the registered address and the holding company and the publicity management firm, and felt something cold move through her chest, the specific cold of beginning to understand that 2 things she had. Thought were separate, were in fact the same thing. Alistair. She looked at him directly. Someone knew about this document specifically. Not rumors, not speculation, the full text. That's not a leak. That's a source. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully read. Careful. Something underneath the careful. Something that had been waiting. "I know," he said, "and in your world." She kept her voice steady. "What do you do when you find a source?" He held her gaze. "I find them first." She nodded slowly. "Then find them." She turned toward the door. "I'll find the rest." She was 3 steps into the hallway when her phone buzzed with a notification from one of the entertainment sites. The headline read, "Sources close to Mallory. Friends say Genevieve Ashcombe staged wedding to punish former fiancé." Below it, a quote from an unnamed source, described Genevieve as unstable and vindictive, claiming she had orchestrated the entire spectacle as revenge against Wesley and had used Alistair Crowe as a prop. Genevieve stopped walking. She read the quote twice. The language was specific in a way that casual sources never managed. It was the language of someone who knew her, who had listened to the way people talked about her, in rooms she was not supposed to know about, and had chosen each word with the deliberate precision of someone who had done this before. She thought about the holding company. She thought about the foundation. She thought about Mallory, who had been raised in the Ashcombe house, while Genevieve grew up in a home with bad wiring, and worse luck, who had spent 7 years positioning herself in Wesley's life with the patience of someone playing a game whose rules she had written herself. Genevieve walked back to Alistair's office doorway. He had not moved. He was watching her. "She's running it," Genevieve said. "This isn't random. It's coordinated. The leak, the framing, the quote, it's a campaign." She held his gaze. "And I think it started long before last week." Alistair was quiet for 2 full seconds. "Then we need to know how long," he said. The business associates arrived on a Tuesday. There were 4 of the men whose names Genevieve had heard referenced in conversations she was not always meant to follow. Men who represented interests that operated in the specific gray territory where legitimate business and other business shared a border and agreed not to examine it too carefully. They arrived for what Alistair described as a scheduled meeting, and she had not been asked to leave, which she interpreted as intentional. She worked at the dining table city. Her documents spread while the meeting occurred in the adjacent room with the door open. She could not hear the specific words, but she could hear the register, the controlled aggression underneath the professional language. The specific timbre of men who were accustomed to having their concerns addressed and who had decided that a concern was overdue for addressing. After 40 minutes, the voices stopped. One of the men, heavyset, late 50s, the kind of face that had weathered a great deal and had decided to stop showing it, appeared in the dining room doorway. He looked at Genevieve with the expression of someone conducting a rapid and unsentimental assessment. "Mrs. Crowe," he said. His voice had the careful neutrality of someone choosing not to be rude. "Ashcombe Crowe," she said without looking up from her documents. "Genevieve is fine." A pause. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "The gentlemen have some concerns about your presence in Alistair's operations." She looked up. "I'm not in his operations. I'm at his dining table reading tax filings." "Those are different things. The association creates." "The association creates exactly what I was told. It might create when I signed the agreement," she said. "I'm aware. I also note that Alistair has managed his operation successfully for over 20 years without the input of people who are concerned about his dining table. So if the concern is operational, bring it to him. If the concern is something else, I'm genuinely not sure what you'd like me to do about it." The man looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he went back into the other room. She heard Alistair's voice, not the words, just the tone, and it was the tone of a man who had listened to something and found it insufficient, and was now explaining, with great patience, why it was insufficient. The meeting ended shortly afterward. When the 4 men had gone, Alistair came to the dining room doorway. He stood there looking at the table and then at her, and she could see him processing something, filing it, deciding where it went. "Fiancé said you corrected him," he said. "He called me Mrs. Crowe. You are technically I'm Genevieve Ashcombe Crowe, and the distinction matters to me." She capped her pen. "Was that a problem?" He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said finally. "It was not a problem." She went back to her documents. He went back to his office. 10 minutes later, when she passed his doorway to refill her coffee, she saw him standing at the window with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the city with an expression she hadn't seen before, not calculation, not management. Something else. Something that she chose, again deliberately, not to examine too closely yet, because she was becoming aware that there was a very specific kind of danger in the landscape of the arrangement, Twachazine, and it had nothing to do with organized crime. She found the second connection on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the legal marriage. She had been working through the Foundation's financial disclosures, line by line. This was the slow part of investigation. A sound like green wood splitting, the part that looked like nothing from the outside and felt like nothing from the inside, until the moment it didn't, and she found a series of transfers that should not have existed. Nearly $2 million, moved across 4 fiscal years, through a sequence of organizations that appeared independent, until you laid their registration document sets side by side, and noticed that they shared addresses, shared agents, and in 2 cases shared the same person listed under different entity names. The organizations received the money as charitable grants. The money did not appear to have been used for charitable purposes. A sound like green wood splitting. What the money appeared to have been used for was not something she could fully establish yet from public documents, but the pattern was clear enough to tell her that the money had gone somewhere deliberate, somewhere that someone had taken considerable effort to obscure. And every chain, every connection, every shared address and recycled name led back through the same publicity management company, the one connected to Mallory. Genevieve sat in the penthouse library she had because the light was better and looked at the documents laid out on the table and understood that what she was looking at was not a family dispute, not a jealous woman's campaign, not even organized harassment. What she was looking at was fraud. She picked up her phone. She started to dial Alistair. She stopped. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand, thinking about what she did with this, thinking about the line between her world and his, the line they had both agreed to maintain, the line that existed in the agreement in black and white, and that she had believed, sincerely, was the right line to keep. Because if she brought this to him, he would help her. She knew that already. He would offer resources and contacts and information, and he would never push past the boundaries she set, because that was who. He was the man who had written the agreement in the first place, who had given her control of every decision, who had let her walk into the lobby to face Wesley alone, because she had asked to. But she also knew that once she brought him in, the shape of the thing changed. It was no longer just her investigation. It became something else. Something shared. Shinji had been carrying things alone for so long that she wasn't entirely certain she knew how to put something down. She dialed. He picked up on the second ring. "I need to show you something," she said. "I'm here." She carried the documents to his office and spread them on his desk, and she explained what she had found methodically. Precisely. No embellishment. Just the facts laid in order, and he listened with the same quality of attention she had noticed before, the attention that meant his mind was working 3 steps ahead while his face showed nothing. When she finished, he looked at the documents for a moment. $2 million over 4 years, he said, at minimum. "I haven't gotten through all the disclosures." He looked up. "This isn't personal anymore." "No," she said, "it's not." He leaned back. "I can get you public record information. Registered agents, filing histories, nothing beyond what a journalist can access." "That's all I need," she said. He nodded. "Genevieve." He said her name with the specific deliberateness of someone who had thought about it. "I want to tell you something. About why I had that card ready 3 years ago." She stilled. "After the fire," he said, "I wanted to take you to dinner. I wanted to call and ask, not as a debt. I just wanted to." He paused. "The next morning I found out you were engaged." She looked at him. "So I waited," he said. "I didn't plan this, but I didn't not plan it either." The room was very quiet. She looked at the documents on his desk, and then at him, and she felt the shape of the arrangement shifting under her hands, like something that had always been a different thing than she'd understood it to be. And she didn't know yet what to do with that, and she didn't have time to decide, because her phone buzzed on the desk between them. It was a news alert. Marriage agreement between Crowe and Ashcombe confirmed fraudulent by unnamed legal source. What was the real deal? Below it, a second alert, 30 seconds later. Genevieve Ashcombe, accused of staging charity scandal to cover Crowe business dealings, per sources. And then, a third. Photograph taken from outside, through the penthouse window, at an angle that should have been impossible from street level of Genevieve at Alistair's desk. His documents, spread in front of her, his hand near hers on the edge of the table. The caption read, "Inside the arrangement, how New York's most feared crime boss bought himself a journalist." Genevieve looked at the photograph and understood, with the cold certainty of someone who had spent a decade covering stories like this one, that someone had been watching them from inside the building. They had a source in the building, and the source had just shown them exactly how close they were willing to get. Genevieve stared at the photograph for 11 seconds. She counted them. It was a reflex, the same reflex that made her count the exits in a room when she first entered it, count the sources before she filed a story, count the ways a thing could go wrong before she committed to a direction. 11 seconds of looking at the image on her phone screen, at the angle of the shot, at the specific geometry of the penthouse window frame visible in the upper left corner of the photograph. Then she looked up at Alistair. "What floor are we on?" she said. 38, the building across the street. "What's the height?" He was already moving to the window, not close, off to the side, the practiced instinct of someone who understood what it meant to be visible. He looked at the adjacent building with the eyes of a man reading a situation rather than seeing a view. 22 floors, he said. The shot came from above us. Then it's this building, yes. She set her phone face down on the desk. Her hands were steady, which she noted with a detached sort of interest, because the rest of her was not particularly steady. The rest of her was running the kind of rapid cold calculation that happened when a story was turned on her, when the thing she was investigating revealed that it had been watching her back the whole time. "Who has access to the upper floors?" she said. "I own 36 through 40. Staff on 36. My office and private floors above." He turned from the window. "The shot angle suggests 39 or 40, so not staff." No. She thought about the 4 men who had come on Tuesday. She thought about Gareth, who she had dismissed because Alistair had dismissed him. A sequence that... She thought about every person who had moved through this penthouse and the 3 she had been here maintenance. A florist who had come once for reasons she hadn't asked about. 2 men in suits who had arrived and left within 20 minutes on a day she'd been in the library. "You have a leak inside your own building," she said. "It appears that way." His voice was controlled, in the manner of someone who was controlling it deliberately. Underneath the control was something she had not heard from him before, a cold, specific anger, the kind that did not flare but compressed. Alistair. She held his gaze, the photograph, the document leak. The quotes that used language too specific to be guesswork. She paused. "Someone is feeding information to Mallory's network from inside your operation. That's not opportunism. That's placement. Someone positioned themselves here before we were married." He was very still. "I know," he said. "You suspected this already." "I suspected something." He moved back to the desk and sat down, and she watched him make a decision she couldn't fully read. "I've been watching 3 people for the past week. I didn't want to tell you until I was certain, because I didn't want to be wrong." She felt something shift in the room, the temperature of it, the specific quality of the air between them. "Who?" He was quiet for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. "Tell me who," she said. "Quiet, precise, Gareth," he said. "I think it's Gareth." She had met Gareth once. He had shaken her hand at the city clerk's office with professional warmth. He had said nothing beyond what was necessary. She had thought, at the time, that she appreciated that. She sat with the name for a moment. "Your attorney," she said. "He's been with me for 11 years. And you think it's him?" He's the only person outside this penthouse who had the full document and also had a reason to want a specific outcome. Alistair's jaw was tight. She could see the effort of keeping his voice level. "I've been looking at his communications. There are patterns. Nothing confirmed yet. How long have you known something was wrong?" He met her eyes. "Since the day after the document leaked." She absorbed that. "You've known for 2 weeks and you didn't tell me." "I wanted to be certain before you what?" Her voice came out quieter than she intended, which was its own kind of signal. "Before you decided what I needed to know. In my own home? About my own safety?" She stopped herself. Breathed. "Alistair, we signed a document that says you don't make decisions for me." "I was protecting, don't." The word landed like a closed door. "Don't finish that sentence the way you were going to finish it." He didn't finish it. The silence between them had a different quality now, not the comfortable silences she had grown accustomed to, but something with edges. She stood up. "I'm going to work. I'll be in the library. Genevieve. I'm not angry, she said, which was partially true. I'm recalibrating. Give me an hour. She went to the library and sat down at her table and stared at her documents for approximately 4 minutes without seeing them. Then she picked up her pen and got back to work because work was the thing she knew how to do when everything else was uncertain, and she needed something she knew. By the following morning, she had 3 more connections in the financial chain. The money moved in a pattern. She now understood foundation funds out, consulting fees nominally in, redirected through the publicity management company that Mallory's associates controlled, and then dispersed across a network of smaller accounts that paid for things that did not appear in any foundation record. Social media accounts, a data research firm, a company that specialized in what its own website described as reputation management for high-profile individuals and organizations. Reputation management. She understood now why the attacks on her had always been so precisely timed, why the language in the anonymous posts had always landed at specific moments after Wesley's public statements, after Alistair's business meetings, after anything that might otherwise have drawn positive attention to Genevieve. Someone had been monitoring the media cycle and injecting content into it with the careful timing of someone who understood how stories gained momentum. This was not Mallory acting alone. Mallory was organized. Mallory had infrastructure. She brought the new documents to Alistair's office without knocking and spread them on his desk without preamble, and he looked at them with the focus of someone who had been waiting for this. She's been running this for at least 4 years, Genevieve said. This predates us. This predates the wedding. She was building this before I ever called you. Alistair studied the documents, the foundation grants. The foundation gives money to what look like independent charities. 2 of them are real. 3 of them exist only on paper and share addresses with her network. Genevieve put her finger on a line of figures. This payment here, 18 months ago, went to the data research firm. I found their client list through a former employee who went public about their practices last year. The Ashcombe Family Foundation is on the list. What does the firm do? Targeted online campaigns, coordinated posting, manufacturing public perception. She looked at him. Someone paid them to make me look unstable. Specifically, repeatedly, over at least 18 months. Before the wedding, before any of this, Alistair was quiet. She wasn't reacting to me marrying you, Genevieve said. She was already running a campaign against me before I made that phone call. The wedding just gave her new material. Why, he said. Not disbelieving, thinking, because of the foundation. Genevieve sat down across from him. My grandfather has been ill. Not publicly, it's been kept quiet, but within the family, people know his health has been declining. He controls the foundation's voting interest. When he decides who inherits that control, she stopped. Laid it out plainly. Mallory needed me discredited. Not just inconvenient, discredited. Because if I'm the unstable, vindictive one who married a crime boss for revenge, my grandfather writes me out and Mallory steps in. The room was very still. This was never about Wesley, Alistair said. Wesley was a tool. He's been a tool for years, and he doesn't know it. She heard her own voice and was startled by the absence of bitterness in it, not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but the flat absence of feeling that sometimes came at the far end of understanding. She needed him beside her to maintain access to the family. She staged the accident to keep him close on a day when it mattered most. She paused. She's been planning this for a long time. Alistair looked at her across the desk. How do you want to handle it? Carefully. She picked up her pen, and completely. She called the hospital nurse on a Thursday. It took 11 days to find her the right nurse, on the right floor, who had been on shift the night. Mallory was admitted after the accident. It took another 3 days of patient, non-pressuring contact before the woman agreed to speak, and even then she spoke carefully, a woman aware of what she was saying and to whom. Her name was Dora. She had been a nurse for 16 years. She had the voice of someone who had spent a long time deciding whether to say something and had finally decided that not saying it was worse. She wasn't in the condition they described, Dora said. When she came in, the family was told she needed emergency surgery, that it was critical. She didn't need emergency surgery. She was bruised, her shoulder was dislocated, she had a mild concussion. Serious enough. Not what was communicated to the family. Genevieve kept her voice neutral. Who communicated the severity to the family? A man called, before she was even fully assessed. He called the emergency contact and said she was in critical condition. A pause. We don't make those calls before assessment. And we didn't make that call. Someone else did. Did Mallory ask anyone to make that call? Dora was quiet for a moment. I can't say what I don't know for certain. What can you say? I can say that she asked me, when she was coherent, how long it would take before someone arrived. She asked me whether they'd gotten the call. She used the word they. Another pause. And when I told her yes, someone was on their way, she relaxed. In a way that didn't look like relief. It looked like Dora seemed to search for the word completion. Like something had gone the way it was supposed to. Genevieve wrote it all down in longhand. The way she did when something mattered too much to risk losing to a technology failure. Dora, she said, I may need you to speak on record at some point. I won't pressure you, but I want you to know that what you've told me is important, and I will not waste it. Dora said she would think about it. Genevieve thanked her and ended the call, and sat in the library and looked at her notes and felt something move through her that was not quite triumph and not quite grief, but something compound the particular feeling of having the thing you suspected confirmed, which sounds like it should feel good and almost never fully does, because confirmation means it was real, and real is heavier than suspected. She was still sitting there 40 minutes later when her phone rang. It was not a number she recognized. She answered anyway, because she had learned over a decade of reporting that unknown numbers at unexpected hours were sometimes the story calling back. Ms. Ashcombe. A man's voice. Careful. My name is not important. I work with a man named Fiancé. You met him briefly. She remembered. The heavy-set man in the doorway. The assessment look. I'm listening, she said. There are people who believe your presence in Alistair's life represents a vulnerability. Not personally. A pause. Professionally. There's a conversation happening at a level above what you've been shown. Some of those people are considering whether the situation needs to be simplified. Her hand tightened on the phone. Simplified how? I'm not describing a threat. I'm describing a conversation. One that Alistair doesn't yet know is happening. Another pause. I'm telling you because, and this is personal opinion, not instruction, I think you're smarter than the situation you're in, and I think you deserve to know the full picture. Why? Because I watched you correct Fiancé. And I watched Fiancé tell 3 other people about it afterward. The voice had something in it she couldn't name, something close to approval, filtered through wariness. People are watching you closely, Ms. Ashcombe. Some of them with interest. Some of them with something else. The line went quiet. Started to ask another question. He had already hung up. She told Alistair that night. She told him everything: the call, the voice, the content. She sat across from him in his office and delivered it with the same precision she used for everything, watching his face as he received it. What she saw in his face was not surprise. It was something closer to decision. You knew Fiancé was having this conversation, she said. I suspected it had been initiated. I didn't know it had advanced. He looked at her steadily. Genevieve, I want to be honest with you about something. Then be honest. My world has rules. One of them is that vulnerabilities get addressed. Not always in ways I choose. Sometimes associates take independent action when they believe someone at the top is compromised. He paused on the word as though he didn't like the way it fit. You are being framed publicly as a liability. If that framing continues to gain traction, there are people around me who will not wait for me to handle it. They'll handle it their own way. She looked at him. Handle it how? Nothing physical. He said it quickly, and she believed him. But pressure on your career, on your relationships, on anything they can reach. He held her gaze. I can manage this. But I need you to understand what's in play. She thought about North Star News. She thought about Doug Farron and her sources, and 11 years of built reputation that a coordinated pressure campaign could erode in ways that were slow, cumulative, and very hard to fight. She thought of Mallory's infrastructure, and the data research firm, and the reputation management company, and the fact that someone had apparently been building a case against her for 4 years. She thought about the photograph taken through the window of a building Alistair owned. Gareth, she said. He was already nodding. I need to deal with Gareth today. I want to be there. A pause. I know it won't be comfortable. I want to be there. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. Gareth arrived at the penthouse at 2 in the afternoon. He came in with the practiced ease of a man who had made this walk many times. The elevator, the foyer, the turn toward Alistair's office, and he was halfway through the office doorway before he saw Genevieve sitting in the chair beside at the desk. Stopped. Something crossed his face. She catalogued it quickly. Not guilt, not fear, something more calculated than either the expression of a man reassessing the room he had walked into. Gareth, Alistair said from behind the desk. His voice was the same as always. That was its own kind of information. Sit down. Gareth sat. He did not look at Genevieve again, which told her that he understood exactly why she was there, and had decided that not acknowledging it was his best position. Alistair opened a folder on his desk. He turned it around and pushed it across so Gareth could see the contents. Communication records, Alistair said. 11 days. Gareth looked at the documents. His face did not change. I'd like to know, Alistair said when it started. Gareth was quiet for a moment that went on long enough to become a choice rather than a hesitation. I don't know what don't, Alistair said. Just the one word, quiet, final. Gareth looked at the documents again. His hands, Genevieve noticed, were very still, on the arms of the chair, the stillness of a man who had decided to manage himself carefully. Who approached you? Alistair said. Nothing, Gareth. A pause. You've been with me for 11 years. Whatever you were promised, whatever you were told about what would happen, when this was over, you know me well enough to know that whoever made those promises cannot deliver them. So let's do this simply. Gareth looked up, and what Genevieve saw in his face then was not defiance. It was something more pathetic and more human than defiance. It was the look of a man who had made a calculation that had gone wrong and was sitting in the room where the wrongness had arrived, and who had not yet decided whether to keep performing or to stop. 6 months ago, Gareth said finally, someone reached out through a third party, said there was a business opportunity, information for compensation. Who? I never had a name. Everything was through cutouts. But the contact came from someone connected to the Ashcombe Family Foundation. Yes or no? A pause, yes. Genevieve kept her face still. The document, Alistair said. The marriage agreement. You provided that. Yes, the photograph. The one taken from the 39th floor. Gareth's jaw moved. I didn't take it. I gave access. I didn't know what they were going to use it for. That's a distinction you'll have time to think about. Alistair closed the folder. You're done here today. My team will be in contact about the terms of your exit. If you speak to anyone about anything you know, anything at all, I will hear about it before they finish reading your message. He looked at Gareth with an expression that was not anger and was not cold and was in some ways worse than either because it was simply done the expression of someone who has finished a calculation. Go, Gareth went. The door closed. Genevieve sat in the silence for a moment. 6 months, she said. 6 months before the wedding. She processed that. Someone knew you'd be at the gala that night. Someone knew about your connection to me before we ever used it. It appears that way. She looked at him, Alistair. The fire at the Marquette. 3 years ago. She said it carefully. Was it investigated? A pause. A very deliberate pause. Yes. Officially ruled electrical. The investigation was brief. Was it electrical? He met her eyes. I've never been certain. The room seemed to shift slightly, not physically, but in the way that a landscape shifts when you understand that what you thought was flat ground has a slope you didn't see before. The fire was engineered, she said slowly, and I pulled you out of it. Then whoever said it didn't account for me. No. And whoever said it, if they're connected to Mallory, then Mallory's operation goes back further than 4 years, he said, and has a different scale than what you've been looking at. She sat with that. She looked at her hands on the folder in her lap, her hands that were still steady, which continued to mildly astonish her, and she thought about Mallory at the hospital, asking the nurse if they had gotten the call. She thought about the staged accident and the dashboard recording she had not yet found, but that Dora had mentioned in passing. There was a recording. I don't know what happened to it, and she thought about infrastructure that was not improvised but built deliberately, built early, built by someone who planned for the long game. A sound like green wood splitting, and then she thought about something she had been holding at a distance for days, because it was the piece that didn't fit the picture she had been building. She thought about her parents. They had known about her biological connection to the Ashcombe family for years. They had known, and they had not in all those years adjusted their behavior toward Mallory. They had continued to favor her, continued to include her, continued to position her in the family structure in a way that gave Mallory access and standing and proximity to Theodore Ashcombe's attention. She had told herself that was weakness, cowardice, the particular moral failure of people who couldn't bear to disrupt what had become comfortable. She had not considered that it might be something else. She picked up her phone and called Carmen. "I need to know something," she said when Carmen answered. Home Family Foundation's board structure. Who holds advisory positions? Specifically, whether either of my parents holds a position would give them financial interest in the foundation's direction. Carmen was quiet for a moment. "Give me an hour." 40 minutes later, Carmen called back. "Your mother?" Carmen said. "She has a discretionary advisory role that was created 8 years ago. Comes with a fee, not a large fee, $40,000 a year, but structured to look like a standard governance payment." A pause. "Jen, it's paid through one of the consulting entities in the chain you sent me." Genevieve closed her eyes. $40,000 a year, for 8 years. Paid through Mallory's network to her mother, in a structure designed to look like ordinary foundation governance. Her mother, who called to defend Mallory, who asked Genevieve to understand, to be patient, to be reasonable. Who had, for 8 years, received a payment from the same network that had been systematically dismantling her daughter's reputation. Whether her mother knew the full shape of it, whether she had been a willing participant or had simply been paid and looked away, was a question Genevieve did not yet have the answer to. But the payment existed, and her mother had known. She sat very still in the library for a long time after she ended the call. The documents were all around her. Her notes were in 3 notebooks. The shape of the thing was now visible in its entirety, not every detail, not every connection, but the architecture, the foundation, the timeline, the players. She should have felt something uncomplicated. Vindication, maybe. The reporter's clean satisfaction of having assembled the truth. Instead, she felt the specific exhaustion of a person who has been fighting a war they didn't know they were in and has finally looked up and seen the full battlefield and understood that they have been surrounded for years by people they thought were on their side. She went to find Alistair. He was in the kitchen this time, which was unusual. She had not often found him in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a cup of coffee and his phone face down beside it, looking at nothing in particular. He looked up when she came in. She told him about her mother. She kept her voice level throughout. She delivered it the way she delivered everything accurately, without embellishment, and she watched him receive it with that particular quality of attention that she had come to rely on. The attention that meant he was not going to offer her a false comfort or a rushed response. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need?" Not "what should we do?" Not "I'll handle it." "What do you need?" She thought about it. Honestly, I don't know yet. She put her hands flat on the counter, felt the cool of it. "I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to finish the investigation, and I'm going to take it to my grandfather before anyone else gets there first. And I'm going to—" She stopped. "What?" he said. "I'm going to have to look my mother in the face and ask her if she knew." She said it without inflection because inflection would have cost her something she didn't have to spare. "And I'm going to have to be prepared for the answer to be yes." Alistair set his coffee cup down and said nothing, which was the correct thing to do, and she was deeply, specifically grateful to him for it. She stood at the counter, for another moment. Then her phone buzzed on the counter between them, and she looked at the screen with the tired reflex of someone who had stopped being surprised by bad news and found something that made her go very still. It was a news alert from the Courier. The headline read, "Sources inside North Star News claim Genevieve Ashcombe used outlet's resources for personal vendetta against family member." Below it, a subheadline, "Investigation into Ashcombe Foundation, allegedly conducted on company time using company sources, senior staff reportedly notified." She stared at it. "They went to my job," she said. Alistair's voice was very even. "Yes, they're not just trying to discredit me publicly. They're trying to get me fired." She looked up from the phone. "If I lose North Star's backing, I lose access. I lose the legal protection. I lose everything that makes this investigation credible instead of just personal." Yes, they know that. They know exactly what they're doing. She set the phone down. She picked it up again. Set it down. "I need to call Doug." Called Doug. He answered on the first ring, which meant he had been expecting her call, which meant he had already seen it. "Doug," she said. "I know," he said. "Come in tomorrow morning. Early. Bring everything you have." A pause that had something in it she had to listen for. "Jen, I've been in this business for 22 years. I know a targeting campaign when I see one. Come in tomorrow." She felt something release in her chest, not relief, but the near relative of relief that comes when one's support holds, when you expected it to fail. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. Just bring everything." She ended the call and turned back to Alistair, and she looked at him across the kitchen and understood something she had been standing adjacent to for weeks without quite facing. She was not going to be able to stay at careful distance from this man much longer. A sound like green wood splitting, not because the arrangement was failing, but because it was working in ways that scared her considerably more than failure would have. She had spent 7 years being careful about Wesley. Careful about her expectations, careful about her wants, careful about what she allowed herself to believe. She had been so well trained in the management of her own feelings that she had almost missed recognizing a new one when it arrived. "I'm going to take a shower," she said, "and then I'm going to go through everything again from the beginning, because I think there's something I've missed about the timeline." She picked up her phone. "And tomorrow I'm going to walk into North Star with everything I have, and I'm going to end this." She was almost out of the kitchen. "Genevieve." She turned. He was still at the counter, both hands wrapped around his coffee cup, looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before, unguarded in a way that his face almost never was. The specific unguardedness of a man who has decided to stop managing something. "I told you I waited," he said. "After the fire. After I found out you were engaged." He paused. "I want you to know that the waiting was not strategic. I wasn't playing a long game. He stopped. Looked at the cup in his hands. "I couldn't get you out of my head. That's all. I couldn't get you out of my head, and I didn't know what to do with that, so I waited. And then you called, and I don't have a cleaner explanation than that." She stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at him. She thought about 7 years with Wesley, and the Vermont cabin, and the ledger she had kept, and the careful management of her own expectations. She thought about Petra's observation, "He tracks your position," and the document he had written to give her control over every choice, and the way he had stood at the altar and told 300 strangers that the decision was hers. She thought about all of it for a moment. "I know," she said. She went to take her shower, and somewhere across the city, in a foundation office that had been running a shadow operation for 4 years, a woman who had spent a long time believing she had won made a phone call to a contact at North Star News and gave them one more piece of information, one she had been holding in reserve. One she believed would finally be enough to bring Genevieve down completely, not knowing that Genevieve had already found it, had already documented it, had already built the case around it so thoroughly that the moment Mallory deployed it, she was going to hand Genevieve exactly the evidence of deliberate targeting that a newsroom needed to justify running the full story. She handed Genevieve the weapon and called it a killing blow. By morning, it would be apparent which of them had miscalculated. Genevieve did not sleep. She had intended to. She had lain down at midnight with the specific disciplined intention of a person who understood that exhaustion was its own kind of enemy, who knew from years of field reporting that the body made worse decisions when it was running on fumes and adrenaline and the particular acidic coffee that North Star kept in the break room. She had closed her eyes and listened to the city doing its indifferent nighttime thing 38 floors below, and she had waited for sleep to arrive. It did not arrive. At 2:15 she got up, went to the library, and worked until 5:30. By the time the city outside began its gray pre-dawn shift, she had assembled everything into a sequence that held. Not just held, was airtight. 4 years of financial transfers documented through public filings. The connection between Mallory's publicity network and the reputation management firm. Dora's account of the hospital night, written up with sourced corroboration from 2 separate hospital administrative records that Carmen had obtained through legitimate channels. Payment to her mother, documented and traceable. The registered agent names that connected 7 supposedly independent organizations into a single coordinated structure. And then the thing Mallory had sent to North Star the night before the piece she had held in reserve, believing it was the kill shot. It was a set of internal communications she had claimed came from a North Star source, purporting to Genevieve misusing company resources. The communications were fabricated. Not clumsily, they were good, the kind of good that required specific technical effort, but they were fabricated. And Genevieve knew they were fabricated because she had been in the specific meetings the communications referenced, and the conversations they described had not occurred. What Mallory did not know was that North Star recorded all internal editorial meetings, standard policy implemented 4 years ago for legal protection purposes. Genevieve had already pulled the recordings and confirmed the discrepancy. The fabricated communications did not match the recordings. The fabricated communications were therefore evidence of forgery. And forgery, in the context of a campaign to discredit a journalist and destroy her professional standing, was not a civil matter. It was criminal. She had that documented by 5:45 in the morning. She showered, dressed, drank 2 espressos standing at the kitchen counter, and was in a car headed to North Star by 7:15. Doug Farron arrived at 7:40, with the particular alert exhaustion of a man who had not slept either and had decided to be productive about it. He came into the conference room, where Genevieve had spread everything across the table, looked at the scope of what she had assembled, pulled out a chair, and sat down. He did not speak for 4 minutes. She let him read. "The forgery," he said finally, "documented against the editorial recordings. Side by side." She pushed the relevant folder across the table. "It's not close. The communications they fabricated have me saying things in meetings that didn't happen. We have audio." Doug opened the folder. "Read it." Closed it. "Who else knows you have this, Carmen?" "You." "Alistair knows I found something, not the specifics." "The hospital nurse. I have her account. She hasn't committed to record yet. I'm not going to pressure her. We have enough without her. But I want to give her the option." Doug leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling in the way of a man running calculations. He had been an editor for 22 years, and he had the specific quality of men who had handled reels as sentimentalized about them, not dramatized them, just handled them with the competence of someone who understood that journalism was a craft, and crafts required patience and precision, and the willingness to take the thing apart and rebuild it if the first construction wasn't right. "Legal review today," he said. "I'll pull in Marcus." Marcus Hale was North Star's senior litigation counsel and the kind of lawyer who had spent 30 years making other lawyers uncomfortable. Genevieve had worked with him twice before, and both times he had told her things she didn't want to hear in ways that were, in retrospect, correct. "I also want to reach out to the Ashcombe family's independent board members," she said. "There are 4 of them. None of them are family. 2 of them have been trying to get a proper audit of the foundation for 3 years and been blocked." Doug looked at her. "Blocked by who?" "Mallory's advisory position gives her access to the board communication structure. She's been slow-rolling their requests." He made a note. "I want to run this in 3 days." She felt something tighten in her chest, not doubt, but the pressure of a timeline. The specific compression of knowing that 3 days was both enough and not enough, and was going to require the kind of focused work that left no room for anything else. 3 days, she said. I'll be ready. She worked at North Star until 6 in the evening. Marcus Hale came in at 10 and spent 4 hours going through everything with the aggressive thoroughness of a man looking for the places it could fall apart, asking questions designed to find the weakest points, pushing at the documentation until he was satisfied that it pushed back. The forgery is your strongest play, he said at the end. The financial chain is solid, but it'll get contested by foundation lawyers. The forgery is concrete, it's demonstrable, and it establishes malicious intent in a way that makes everything else land harder. Good, she said, the nurse. I'll call her today. If she comes on record, the hospital narrative becomes independently corroborated. Without her, you're running the dashboard recording reference. I'm still looking for the dashboard recording. Marcus looked at her. You have a source on that? I have a lead. She paused. The vehicle was impounded after the accident. Impound records are public. The recording is a different question, but she stopped. I'm working on it. Work fast, he said. 3 days. She drove back to the penthouse at 7, eating a sandwich in the car that she tasted approximately none of because her mind was running parallel tracks of elimination on one side, the dashboard recording on the other, and underneath both of them, the thing she had been postponing since Carmen told her about her mother's payments. She had to talk to her mother. Not because it would change the investigation, the documentation existed regardless of what her mother said, but because Genevieve was not going to publish something that implicated her own family without first looking her mother in the face. She owed herself that. She wasn't sure she owed her mother anything at this point, but she owed herself the knowledge of whether the woman had been complicit or simply bought. She made the call from the car. Her mother answered on the second ring. Genevieve. The same voice as always. The voice that had been managing Genevieve for 31 years, careful, positioned, already building toward whatever she needed Genevieve to do. Mom, she said, I need to meet with you. Tomorrow morning. At your house. A pause. Is this about the articles? Because I told your father we should. It's not about the articles. I need to meet with you privately. No one else there. Can you do that? Another pause. Longer this time. In the space of it, Genevieve heard something she had not heard before. In her mother's pauses, not calculation, but something more fragile. Something that might have been the specific quiet of a person who had been waiting to be found out and had finally heard footsteps. Yes, her mother said. I can do that. She told Alistair when she got back. She told him about the 3-day timeline, the forgery documentation, Marcus's assessment, and the plan to see her mother in the morning. She sat across from him in the office and delivered it with the same precision she had used for everything, and he listened with the same quality of attention, and then he told her something she had not expected. There's a man named Prentice Saul, he said. He was the driver of the vehicle in Mallory's accident. She stilled. You found him. He's been living in Philadelphia for the past 18 months. He had a certain amount of difficulty after the accident, lost his job, had some financial trouble. Someone helped him relocate. He paused. The help came through the same consulting structure as everything else. She stared at him. He was paid to relocate. He was paid to leave New York. Yes, she leaned forward. Alistair, the dashboard recording. If the vehicle had a dash cam, it did. It was a livery car. Standard equipment. The recording would have been in the vehicle when it was impounded. It would have been logged as evidence. Yes. And then it would have been released when the investigation closed. Released to who? To the registered owner of the vehicle. He held her gaze. The livery company was dissolved 14 months ago. Assets, including any records, were handled by a liquidating agent. She felt something cold in her chest. The agent. Shares and address, he said, with the holding company in the chain you documented. She sat back. They took the recording, she said. They got it out of the impound chain through the liquidation. That's what I believe. Then Prentice Saul was there, Alistair said. He was in the vehicle. He heard what was said. She looked at him. Can you find him? I already did. He reached into his desk and pushed a single sheet of paper across to her. An address in Philadelphia. A phone number. He doesn't know who to trust. Been scared for 18 months. But he's still there, which means he hasn't run. He paused. He might talk to a journalist. She took the paper. She looked at it for a moment. You've been doing this in parallel, she said. You've been running your own investigation. Not an investigation. Just asking questions. He met her eyes. I told you I'd give you public record leads. His location came from a licensed SIP trace, which is public record methodology. The address connection came from the same registration documents you found. He paused. I stayed inside the line. She thought about this. She thought about the line they had drawn, and the care with which he had maintained it, and the specific effort it must have taken to find Prentice Saul and sit on the information rather than acting on it himself. She thought about what it meant that he had sat on it and waited for her. Thank you, she said. She called Prentice Saul from the library at 9:30 that night. He answered on the fourth ring with the voice of a man who had been sitting next to his phone deciding whether to answer it. Not asleep, not distracted, just deciding. Mr. Saul, she said. My name is Genevieve Ashcombe. I'm an investigative journalist with North Star News. I'd like to talk to you about an accident that happened in Manhattan 18 months ago. Silence, Mr. Saul. I already know most of what happened. Zine. I'm not calling to get information I don't have. I'm calling because you're the only person who was in that vehicle, and I think you've been carrying something that you didn't agree to carry, and I think you deserve the chance to put it down. A very long silence. Then how did you find me? Careful work, she said. That's all. Another silence. She could hear him breathing, a man working through a decision. There was a recording, he said finally. Dashboard camera. Built-in, standard in all the company cars. A pause. I know what was on it. I heard it. Tell me, he told her. She wrote it down word for word. She went to her mother's house at 9 in the morning. Her childhood home, her adoptive home, the house where she had grown up before. The hospital records revealed what everyone had decided not to tell her was a brownstone in the West Village that smelled the same as it always had. A combination of her mother's particular perfume and the same pot of dried flowers that had sat in the hallway for 20 years. Her mother was in the sitting room. She had dressed carefully, which told Genevieve something. People dressed carefully when they were bracing. Genevieve did not sit down. She stood in the center of the room and looked at her mother and said, I know about the payments. Her mother's face did not collapse. It did something more complicated, a kind of slow settling, like a building that has decided to accept the earthquake rather than keep fighting it. She looked older than Genevieve had expected her to look in this moment. How long have you known? Her mother said. Long enough. She kept her voice even. Not warm, not cold even. I need to understand what you knew. Genevieve, what did you know? Flat. Direct, the voice she used for interviews when she needed truth rather than performance. Did you know what the payments were for? Her mother looked down at her hands. Not at first, but eventually. A pause that lasted long enough to be its own answer. Mallory told me it was foundation governance compensation. Standard practice for advisory roles. And when you found out it wasn't? Her mother looked up. Her eyes were dry, which Genevieve had expected. Her mother did not cry in front of people, had never cried in front of people. It was one of the few things they had in common. She said it would stop if I cooperated, if I helped manage the family's response to things. When you did things, she said if I kept the family stable, kept everyone calm, it would all go away. Genevieve heard this and sat with it for a moment, not the shock of it, because she had been building toward this understanding for days, but the specific weight of it, specific weight of her mother, knowing and managing it, of being managed herself, of the neat, terrible recursion of it. You let her pay you to work against me, she said. I was trying to protect the family. I am your family. The evenness cracked. Not completely. Just enough. I am your family, and she paid you to help discredit me, and you took the money and told yourself it was for stability. She stopped. Breathed. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because I'm going to take this to grandfather before the week is out, and I need to know whether you're going to be honest with him or whether I'm going to have to do that for you. Her mother was very still. Will you be honest with him? Genevieve said. A long silence. Yes, her mother said. Quiet. The quiet of a woman who had been holding something heavy for a long time and had finally put it down. Yes. Genevieve left without saying anything further. She sat in the car outside for 90 seconds. Then she drove back to North Star. The shareholder dinner was in 2 days. Genevieve had known about it. For months, it was the annual Ashcombe Group event, a formal dinner at the Meridian Hotel where the family foundation presented its annual report to investors and the board formally seated new advisory appointments. This year, Mallory was scheduled to be formally appointed head of the foundation. This year, Genevieve was going to be there. She told Doug that morning. He looked at her across the conference table, where they'd been reviewing the final story structure with Marcus for 3 hours. You want to go to the shareholder dinner? I want to present the findings there. In person, before she's formally appointed. Doug was quiet for a moment. That's not how we usually do this. No, it's not. She met his eyes. But Mallory has spent 4 years building a case against me in public, using public forums with a coordinated media strategy. I'm not going to let the takedown happen in a news cycle. I'm going to let it happen in the room where she expected to win. She paused. The right story shape. You know it is. Doug looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at his documents. The legal exposure, Marcus said, if we present unverified. Everything is verified, Genevieve said. Every piece. I have Prentice Soul on record. I have Dora on record. She called me this morning. She's willing to go on record. I have the financial chain fully documented. I have the forgery documented against North Star's own recordings. She paused. Marcus, is there a single piece of this that doesn't hold? A silence. No, he said, there isn't. Then I'm going to that dinner. The day before the dinner, everything nearly fell apart. Came from a direction she had not predicted, which was the thing about well-built plans. She had learned over a decade of reporting. They didn't fall apart where you expected. They fell apart at the place you were most confident about. She was at North Star at 3 in the afternoon when her phone rang. Unknown number, New York area code, she answered. Ms. Ashcombe. A woman's voice, clipped, professional, with the specific texture of someone communicating information they had been instructed to communicate. I represent a group of investors with interests in the Ashcombe Group. I'm calling to let you know that there is active discussion of filing a preemptive legal action to prevent publication of your investigation on the grounds of defamation and interference with business interests. The filing would be submitted tonight. She kept her voice even. On what grounds? On the grounds that your investigation is motivated by personal animus against a family member and constitutes targeted harassment rather than legitimate journalism. That's not a legal standard. It's a filing. It doesn't have to be a winning argument to be a delay. A pause. I'm calling as a courtesy. There may be room for conversation before anything is filed, if you were open to. I'm not open to that, Genevieve said. File whatever you're going to file. We'll respond appropriately. She ended the call and dialed Marcus before she had fully processed the conversation. Marcus, to his credit, said, I've been expecting this. Let me call our litigation team. They might file tonight. Then we'll respond tonight. Jenna, pause. This is a delay tactic. They know the story holds. They're trying to push you past the dinner. Don't let them. She was already walking. I won't. She called Alistair from the street outside North Star. He answered immediately. They're trying to file a preemptive defamation action, she said. Tonight, to delay past the shareholder dinner. A pause. Brief. Who's the attorney of record? She told him the name the woman had mentioned. A silence that lasted exactly 3 seconds. I know that firm. They've filed 2 of these in the last year. Both were thrown out, but both achieved the delay they were filed for. Another pause. Genevieve. There's a board member, independent, been with the Ashcombe Group for 6 years. His name is Alderton. He has been trying to get a forensic audit for 3 years. Call him tonight. I have his number from the independent board list. Call him before they file. If he knows what you have, he can call an emergency board session for tomorrow. A session that preempts the dinner's formal appointment process. She stopped walking. If the appointment is formally delayed, pending a board inquiry, then the dinner becomes the inquiry, he said, and you don't need to fight a defamation filing because you're not breaking news. You're presenting evidence to a board with legitimate authority to receive it. She stood on the sidewalk on 6th Avenue with the city moving around her and felt the shape of it shift into place, the thing that had been almost right becoming fully right, the architecture clicking into the position it had been building toward. "That's good," she said. "Call Alderton," he said. Tonight. She called Alderton at 7:15. He was a careful man, methodical, the kind of person who asked questions before he committed to anything, and he asked 7 of them before he said, "I'll need to see the documentation. I can have it to you by 9. If it's what you're describing." He paused. "I've been waiting 3 years for someone to get past the access controls on this. 3 years of requests going sideways and explanations that didn't fully explain." Another pause. "Send it." She sent it. At 10:47 that night, Alderton called back. "Emergency board session," he said. "Tomorrow afternoon. 4 o'clock, before the dinner. I'll notify the other independent members tonight." A pause. "Genevieve, this is comprehensive, I know," she said. She's been in that room for 3 years. She knows the board members. She knows the procedures. "I know," she said again, "which is why I need to be in the room first." The morning of the dinner, Genevieve woke at 5 and lay still for exactly 2 minutes. Then she got up. She did not eat breakfast. She drank 1 espresso, standing at the counter, the same way she had on her wedding morning, different life, same reflex. She dressed in the only suit she kept at the penthouse, dark charcoal, the one she wore when she needed to walk into a room and be taken seriously immediately. Alistair was in the kitchen when she came through. He looked at her, took in the suit, the contained expression, the folder she was carrying. He said nothing. He poured a second espresso and set it beside hers. She drank it. "Thank you," she said. "For Prentice. For Alderton's contact. For," she stopped, "for not taking any of this over. It wasn't mine to take over. No," she picked up her folder. "But you could have. Some men would have." He looked at her with that expression she had catalogued, the unguarded one, the one he had shown her in the kitchen 2 nights ago. "Some men would have. Yes." She nodded once and left. The Meridian Hotel was 42 floors of glass and polished stone on Park Avenue, and its main ballroom had hosted the Ashcombe Group's annual event for 11 consecutive years. The board session happened at 4 in a private conference room on the 32nd floor for independent board members, Genevieve, Marcus Hale, and an Ashcombe Group corporate secretary who had been notified of the session 40 minutes before it began, and who had the face of a man walking into something he had not been told the dimensions of. Mallory did not know the session was happening until 20 minutes before it began, when Alderton sent the formal notification to all board members as required by charter. Genevieve was in the room when she arrived. Mallory stopped in the doorway. She was dressed for the dinner, a deep blue dress, immaculate, the presentation of a woman who had expected tonight to be a celebration. She stood in the doorway and looked at Genevieve sitting at the conference table with 2 inches of documented evidence in front of her and Marcus Hale beside her and 4 independent board members in their chairs. Something moved across Mallory's face. Something that was gone very quickly, the flash of a real expression before the management of it happened. Then she composed herself and walked in and sat down. "I wasn't informed this was the agenda," she said to Alderton. "The agenda was sent with the session notification," Alderton said. 20 minutes ago. That's not sufficient. The charter requires 48 hours for standard sessions," Alderton said. "Emergency sessions have a different provision. This is an emergency session." He looked at Genevieve. "Ms. Ashcombe, please begin," she began. She had done this before, presented investigative findings to rooms full of people who had reasons not to want to hear them. She had presented to legislative committees and hospital boards and corporate governances and corporate governance panels, and she had learned over a decade that the way you presented determined what people believed as much as the content of what you were presenting. She presented it clean. No emotion, no theater, just the documents in order, the connections laid out step by step, the financial chain from foundation grants through the consulting structure to the reputation management firm. The forgery documented against North Star's recordings, Prentice Soul's account, Dora's hospital testimony. She laid it all out. She was 40 minutes in when Mallory said, "This is personal." Genevieve stopped, looked at her. "Everything she's presenting," Mallory said, her voice very controlled, "is motivated by personal grievance. She has never accepted that she isn't the family's priority. She has never accepted that some of us earned. The forgery," Marcus said, with the quiet authority of a man who had 30 years of patience for this specific kind of argument. "The forged communications. Would you like to address those specifically?" Mallory was quiet. "The dashboard recording transcript," Marcus continued, "sourced from the driver of the vehicle. Would you like to address that?" Mallory looked at Genevieve, not at Marcus. Genevieve. And in her eyes was something that Genevieve had never seen there before in 27 years of knowing this woman, not the managed version, not the composed version, but the real version, the one underneath all the construction. Fear, real present. The fear of a person who has run a game for years and has just understood that the game is over. Genevieve. Her voice was different now. The control was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. "We grew up together. Whatever you think I've done." "I know what you've done," Genevieve said. "It's documented." "Family don't." The word came out with more force than she had intended, and she let it stand. "Don't use that word with me. You know what you did. You know how long you did it. The room knows it now." Mallory looked at the 4 board members. She looked at the documents spread across the table. She looked at Marcus. She looked back at Genevieve. And something in her face cracked open, not the fear, not the calculation, but something more raw and more real than either, something that had the texture of a very old wound. "I grew up in your family's house," she said. "I grew up thinking I was supposed to be there. And then they found out the truth, and they still chose me. They still chose me over you, and you couldn't accept it. You never accepted that they chose me." The room was silent. Genevieve looked at her for a long moment. "They did choose you," she said. "That's true. And it hurt. For a long time, it hurt more than I knew how to say." She paused. "But Mallory, you didn't build something out of that hurt. You built a machine. You built a system to take what you already had and take what I had too. And those are not the same thing." She looked at the board members. "The financial irregularities require a forensics audit. I'm requesting that the board vote tonight to commission one and to suspend the foundation advisory appointments pending the results." Alderton looked at the other 3 members. The vote took 4 minutes. It was unanimous. Mallory sat in her chair and did not move while the vote was conducted. And when it was over, she sat in the particular stillness of a person who has arrived at the end of something and has not yet found a way to begin again. The corporate secretary stood up to notify the dinner organizers that the foundation appointment portion of the evening's program was suspended pending board review. And Genevieve gathered her documents into the folder, capped her pen, and stood up. She was 3 steps from the door when Mallory's voice came from behind her, quiet, finally stripped of everything except itself. "What do you want from me?" Genevieve stopped. She turned. She looked at Mallory, really looked. The way she had not permitted herself to look for a long time, because looking had always cost her something she couldn't afford. "Nothing," she said. "I don't want anything from you. I haven't wanted anything from you in a very long time." She paused. "What I wanted was for it to stop, and now it's going to stop." She walked out. The hallway outside was empty except for Marcus, who had followed her out, and the particular quality of silence that exists after something large has finished. "The defamation filing," she said. "Withdrawn 20 minutes ago," Marcus said. "Someone saw which way this was going." She nodded. Downstairs, the shareholder dinner was already underway. In the ballroom, 300 Ashcombe Group investors and guests who had come expecting an evening of foundation presentations and board announcements and the particular comfortable theater of institutional wealth performing its annual rituals. They did not yet know that the evening's program had changed. They were about to find out. And across the city, in the penthouse on the 38th floor, a man who had canceled his travel plans on a wedding morning 4 weeks ago was sitting in his office waiting for a phone call. A sound like greenwood splitting, because he had understood from the beginning that this was her fight to win, and he had done what he could do without crossing the line, and the rest of it belonged to her. His phone buzzed. A single message. It's done. Come to the Meridian. He was in the car in 4 minutes. The ballroom of the Meridian Hotel was exactly as Genevieve remembered it from 11 years of attending this dinner as an Ashcombe family member, the same ivory tablecloths, the same arrangement of low floral centerpieces, designed to allow eye contact across the table, the same chandelier light that made everyone look slightly better than they were and slightly more important than they felt. She stood at the entrance for a moment before going in, not hesitating, just taking inventory. The journalist reflex: read the room before you enter it. Understand what you're walking into. Know where the exits are and where the power is concentrated and who is watching whom. 300 people. Round tables of 10. The outer ring populated by investors and associates. The inner tables reserved for family and board members. At the head table, her grandfather Theodore Ashcombe sat in the chair he had occupied at this dinner. For 31 years, a man of 78, who moved more carefully than he once had, and whose hands showed the particular tremor of age, but whose eyes remained the sharpest thing in any room he entered. Beside him, a chair that had been set for Mallory, currently empty. Her parents were at the family table. Her father was talking to someone across from him with a practiced social ease of a man who had spent decades in rooms like this. Her mother was not talking to anyone. She was sitting with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the tablecloth in front of her, and she had the bearing of a woman waiting for something she had agreed to endure. Marcus came up beside Genevieve. The board has notified the event coordinator, he said quietly. The foundation appointment has been pulled from the program. They're running a modified agenda. No announcement about why, just that the foundation section has been postponed pending governance review. Who knows? Alderton's table knows. The corporate secretary. Your grandfather's assistant called him 20 minutes ago, and he asked to speak with you before dinner is over. A pause. He knows something happened. He doesn't know the shape of it yet. She nodded. I'll go to him now. She crossed the ballroom. She was aware of being watched, the specific quality of awareness that settles over a person who has spent 6 weeks in public controversy, the feeling of being a story that other people are reading while you're still living it. She did not adjust her pace or her expression. She walked the same way she had walked down the aisle on the morning that had started all of this, chin level, eyes forward, because the alternative was to let the room see her uncertainty, and she had not come this far to do that. Theodore Ashcombe saw her coming from 20 feet away. He watched her approach with the eyes of a man who had built a company over 50 years and had learned, in the process, to read people the way other men read financial statements, looking for the places where the numbers didn't add up, places where the presentation diverged from the reality underneath. She pulled out the chair beside him and sat down. Genevieve, he said. His voice was the same as it had always been, deep, deliberate, the voice of a man who had never been casual about words. Grandfather. She placed the folder on the table in front of him. I need you to look at something before this evening goes any further. He looked at the folder. He looked at her face. He reached out and opened it. He read for 11 minutes. She sat beside him and did not speak, and around them, the dinner continued its social machinery conversation. Wine poured. Appetizer plates arriving and departing, and Theodore Ashcombe read every page with the thoroughness of a man who had not survived 50 years in business by skimming. When he finished, he closed the folder. He was quiet for a moment that was longer than she expected. How long have you had this? He said. The full picture, 3 days. The beginning of it, a few weeks. And you brought it here. He looked at her. Not to the press first. The press comes tomorrow. I wanted you to have it first. He was quiet again. She watched his face, the face of an old man receiving information that was restructuring, something he had believed to be one shape and was now revealing to be another. It was not a comfortable thing to watch, but she did not look away, because she had decided some time ago that looking away from difficult things was a habit she was going to stop indulging. The payments to your mother, he said. She knew. She knew some of it. She's prepared to be honest with you about what she knew. And Mallory. He said the name with the specific, careful flatness of someone managing what would happen to their voice if they stopped managing it. The accident staged. The driver has given a statement. He's on record. Theodore Ashcombe put his hand on the closed folder. His hand was steady, which told her something about him that she had always known but was now seeing very specifically. This was a man who had received bad news before, significant bad news, the kind that restructures a life, and had learned not to let his hands show what his chest was doing. "I owe you an apology," he said. She had not expected that to be the next thing he said. She did not move. "I knew the identification error caused you harm," he said. "I knew that your parents' handling of it caused you harm. I allowed it to continue because disruption seemed worse than the harm." He paused. "That was a cowardly calculation, and I made it. I want you to know that I know I made it." She looked at her grandfather for a moment, this man she had spent her life on the peripheral of, never quite inside the circle of, close enough to be affected by his decisions, and far enough to have no voice in them. "Thank you," she said. "It came out quiet, not performed." "Just true," he nodded. Once, then he straightened in his chair with the deliberate effort of a man setting something down and picking something else up. "What do you need from me tonight?" he said. Mallory arrived in the ballroom at 7:45. She had changed out of the blue dress. She was wearing black now, and Genevieve noticed that detail in the way. She noticed all details, noted it, filed it, moved on. Black was a choice. Black meant something had shifted in how Mallory was approaching the room she was walking into. She came in through the side entrance, which meant she had been informed about the modified agenda. She scanned the room with the rapid efficiency of someone assessing damage, and her eyes found Genevieve at the head table beside Theodore, and something in her expression went through several rapid adjustments before it settled. She sat at the family table. She did not look at Genevieve again. For 40 minutes, the dinner proceeded. Genevieve ate some of her food. She spoke to two of the independent board members, who came to the head table to speak with Theodore. She accepted a glass of water from a passing server and drank it. She did all the small, ordinary things that a person does in the middle of an extraordinary situation, because the small, ordinary things are how the body gets through, how the hours pass, how a person arrives at the moment they've been building toward without having burned all their fuel in the approach. At 8:30, Theodore Ashcombe stood up. The room shifted, the specific shift of 300 people, recognizing that the formal portion of the evening was beginning. Conversations paused. Chairs turned. The room oriented itself toward the head table with the practiced attentiveness of people who had come here for this. Theodore spoke for 4 minutes. He spoke about the foundation. He spoke about the governance review that the board had initiated. He spoke about the importance of institutional integrity and the obligation of stewardship. And he spoke in the measured cadences of a man who had written speeches and given to, decided to dispense speeches, and had now decided to dispense with the speech and say the thing plainly. He said that an investigation had uncovered significant financial irregularities in the foundation's operations over a period of years. He said that the board had voted unanimously to commission a forensic audit. He said that the foundation's advisory appointments were suspended pending the audit's completion. He said that his granddaughter, Genevieve, had brought this information to the board. The room was very quiet. "I have also decided," Theodore said, "to transfer my controlling voting interest in the Ashcombe Group Foundation to Genevieve, effective at the close of this fiscal year. The transfer is already in process with our corporate attorneys." Genevieve had not known that part was coming. She sat perfectly still while the weight of it settled. At the family table, her father had gone very still. Her mother had not moved, had not looked up. And Mallory was sitting in her chair, with her hands flat on the table, in front of her and her face arranged into an expression of such complete control that the effort of it was visible in her jaw, in the set of her shoulders, in the specific tension of a person holding a structure together by force of will. Theodore sat down. The room began to breathe again, the particular collective exhale of 300 people who had just been told something significant and had not yet processed what it meant. And then Mallory stood up. It was not a planned thing. Genevieve could see that immediately, could see it in the way Mallory moved, the way her chair scraped back with more force than intended. The way her body had made the decision before, whatever part of her brain was still calculating had authorized it. She stood up and the room went quiet again. A different quiet this time. The quiet of people who sense that something is about to happen that they have not been prepared for. "I want to speak," Mallory said. Her voice was controlled, but underneath the control was something that had stopped being manageable. Genevieve recognized it. She had heard it 2 hours ago in the conference room on the 32nd floor, and she recognized it now as the sound of a person who has decided that they have nothing left to lose by saying the real thing. Theodore looked at her. "Mallory, I want to speak," she said again. Louder. Not shouting, but louder. The room waited. She looked at Genevieve. "You want them to think you won," she said. "You want everyone in this room to look at you and see the righteous one. The one who was wronged and endured and prevailed." Her voice had a ragged edge now, not breaking, but showing the strain of the structure holding it. "You're going to walk out of here tonight with everything. The foundation, the family, the man you married, and everyone is going to say what a remarkable woman you are." Genevieve did not move. "But I grew up in this family." Mallory's voice dropped. Not quieter, exactly more compressed, more pressurized, the way a voice goes when the emotion powering it is too much to let out at full volume. "I grew up believing I belonged here, and then a hospital record showed up, and suddenly everything I thought was mine was reclassified. I was reclassified. And your family," her eyes moved to Genevieve's parents, "then back your family kept me. They kept me, and they kept you too, and they tried to manage both of us, and they did it badly, and everyone paid for that. But you didn't pay the way I paid." The room was absolutely still. "I am not asking you to forgive me," Mallory said. "I know what I did. I know the shape of it. I am telling you that it did not come from nowhere. It came from 20 years of being afraid that one day someone was going to look at me and say, 'You don't actually belong here.' You never did." She stopped. Her jaw worked. "I tried to make sure that couldn't happen. I did it wrong. I did it very wrong." She paused one more time. "That's all I have." She sat down. The room remained still for a moment that lasted longer than moments usually do. Genevieve looked at Mallory. She looked at the woman who had grown up beside her, who had taken what Genevieve was supposed to have and had been afraid of losing it every single day, who had built a system of protection out of fraud and manipulation, and the specific desperation and eruptions from someone who had never felt secure in what they had. She looked at her and felt something she had not anticipated feeling. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the complete sense. But something that's adjacent to understanding. And understanding was its own particular weight. She did not stand up. She did not speak. She did not perform anything for the room. She simply sat with it and let it be what it was. And after a moment she looked down at the folder in front of her and then back at the room. The room understood that whatever was happening between these two women was not going to be resolved in this ballroom tonight, was not going to be packaged into something clean and presentable, and the room slowly, with the particular social intelligence of 300 people reading the same cue, simultaneously returned to itself. Wesley found her in the hallway outside the ballroom at 9:15. She had stepped out for air, real air. The hallway was not outdoors, but it was away from the noise, and she needed a moment of away. She was standing near the window at the end of the corridor when she heard his footsteps and turned. He looked worse than he had in the lobby of Alistair's building. The 2 weeks between then and now had done something to his face, not aged him exactly, but stripped something from it. Some layer of the confidence that had always been part of how he moved through the world. "I saw the board session announcement," he said. "I wasn't in there, but I heard." He stopped a few feet from her. "I heard what she said in the ballroom. Everyone heard what she said. Genevieve." He said her name the way it always had, with a weight to it. The weight of 7 years, the weight of believing that saying her name a certain way was its own kind of argument. "The accident. I didn't know. I know you didn't. If I had known, Wesley." She kept her voice even. "I believe you didn't know. I do. That's not the issue." She looked at him steadily. "The issue is what you did know. What you knew every time you left. Every time I waited. Every time you told me I would understand, and I did, because I had decided that your capacity for loyalty was something I was lucky to be near even when it wasn't directed at me. She paused. You didn't deceive me about the accident. You just chose over and over. And I kept letting that be enough. His jaw was tight. I loved you. I know you did. I think you still do in the way you're capable of. She said it without cruelty, because cruelty would have required a kind of energy she did not have and had not had for some time. But loving someone and consistently choosing someone else are two things that can exist in the same person, and I spent 7 years waiting for the first one to outweigh the second. It didn't. She reached into her pocket and took out the engagement ring. She had been carrying it since the wedding morning, not knowing when the right moment would be. I should have given this back sooner. She held it out. He looked at it. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. He took the ring. He stood there for a moment holding it, and in his face she saw the real grief of it not performed, not strategic. The actual grief of a man who understood in this specific moment that something was finished in a way that could not be revised. Is he good to you? Wesley said. The question came out with the difficulty of something that had cost him something to ask. She thought about the agreement written to give her control, about the coffee placed beside hers without being asked, about a man who had found the driver of a staged accident and waited for her to be ready to use the information. Yes, she said. Wesley nodded once, very slowly, and then turned and walked back down the hallway toward the elevator, and she watched him go, because she thought she owed him that not sentiment, not longing, but the simple witness of watching a 7-year chapter close and not looking away while it did. Her parents found her before she left. It was her mother approached first, coming through the thinning crowd of guests with the careful, deliberate movement of a woman who has decided to do something difficult and has committed to not stopping. Her mother stopped in front of her. She did not make an excuse. She did not explain or position or manage. She looked at her daughter with eyes that were finally plainly showing what they had always contained underneath the management. I'm sorry, she said. 2 words, nothing attached to them. No qualification, no context, no pivot toward her own justification. Genevieve looked at her mother for a long moment. I know, she said. Her father came up beside her mother and put his hand on her mother's arm. And he looked at Genevieve with the face of a man who was still working out what he wanted to say, who had not arrived at 2 plain words yet, and was not going to pretend he had. Give me time, he said. It was the most honest thing she had heard her father say in years. Okay, she said. They were not healed. She did not pretend they were healed. She did not perform the resolution that the moment seemed to want. She simply took what was real, the apology, the request for time, the fact that they had come to her rather than requiring her to come to them, and she let that be enough for tonight. Knowing that enough for tonight was not the same as enough forever, and that the rest of it was going to take longer than a conversation in a hotel hallway could contain. Alistair was waiting in the lobby. He had come to the hotel as she'd asked, come to the Meridian, but he had not come into the ballroom. She found him in a chair near the lobby window, jacket on, no phone in his hand, just sitting in the way he sometimes sat when he was thinking, not restless, not idle, but present, in the specific way of someone who is comfortable with their own company. He stood when he saw her. She crossed the lobby and stopped in front of him, and they stood there for a moment in the marble and chandelier light of the hotel lobby with the city moving beyond the glass windows behind him. How are you? He said. She thought about the honest answer. Tired, clearer than I've been in a long time. Tired. She paused. My grandfather transferred the voting interest. I heard. Alderton texted. His eyes moved across her face with the attention she had cataloged tracking, noting, not missing. How do you feel about it? Like it's too large a thing to have a feeling about yet. She looked at him. He also apologized, your grandfather. Yes. Alistair was quiet for a moment. Then that must have been unexpected, she said. Yes. He looked at her with that expression, the unguarded one, the one she had stopped pretending she didn't see. She had been thinking, in the spare minutes of the last 2 days, about what it meant to trust someone. Not in the abstract, not philosophically, but in the specific, practiced daily way, the way you knew someone's habits well enough to note when they changed, The way you anticipated the coffee beside yours, on the counter. The way you understood that silence from a particular person meant thought rather than absence. She had a sound like green wood splitting. She had spent seven years building that kind of knowledge around Wesley, and it had been real knowledge. She had known him, but the knowledge had never been matched by the safety that was supposed to come with it. With Alistair, the safeties had arrived before the knowledge, which was backwards from everything she understood about how these things were supposed to work, and she had been suspicious of it. For that reason, had kept it at a measured distance while she assessed it. Because she was a journalist, and journalists assess. She had been assessing for 6 weeks. She was done assessing. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Then tell me. The night you said you couldn't get me out of your head." She held his gaze. "I've been carrying that since you said it. Not because it scared me. Because it was familiar, in a direction I hadn't expected." She paused. "I couldn't get you out of my head either, after the fire. I told myself it was the adrenaline, the circumstance. I was engaged. I had a life that was supposed to be moving in a specific direction." She stopped. "I told myself a lot of things." He did not move. He did not rush toward whatever was coming or brace against it. He simply stood and waited, which she now understood was its own kind of answer about who he was. "I don't want the 2 years," she said. "I don't want the arrangement. I want—" She stopped. The honest word was harder than the managed word, and she used it anyway. "I want to try the real thing with you, if that's what you want." He looked at her for a moment that was longer than necessary and exactly the right length. "You know it's what I want," he said. "I know." She almost smiled. "I wanted to say it first. I've been waiting on other people's timing for 7 years. I'm done with that." He reached into his jacket and took out a ring. Not the ring from the ceremony, a different one. Smaller, not showy, the ring of someone who had thought about what she would actually want to wear rather than what would look significant in a photograph. He did not put it on her finger, he held it. "I was going to wait," he said. "For the right moment. I had about 6 different right moments planned, and then I decided that the planning was its own kind of problem." He looked at the ring in his hand. "Genevieve, I have spent most of my life being certain about things. What I wanted, what I was building, what I was protecting." He paused. "You are the first person in a very long time who has made me uncertain in a way that I wanted to stay uncertain. Because uncertainty about you meant you were real and not something I'd constructed in my own head." He met her eyes. "Will you stay? Not for the agreement, not for the arrangement. Just stay." She looked at him. She thought about the bridal suite and the ivory dress and the text message that had arrived at 11:47 and the phone call she had made that had changed the entire shape of what her life was going to be. She thought about 6 weeks of coffee on the counter and silences that meant thought, and a man who had written a document specifically designed to give her the power to leave. She thought about Vermont and waiting and the ledger she had kept for 7 years and finally sat down. She reached out and took the ring from his hand. She put it on herself. "I'll stay," she said. The story ran in North Star News on a Tuesday. Genevieve had spent the final day before publication reading every word of it 3 times, fact-checking her own fact-checking, sitting across from Marcus and Doug in the conference room, and answering every question they had left to ask. The piece was long 6,000 words, the kind of length that a story only earned when the documentation was dense enough to support it. It ran with the dashboard recording transcript, Prentice Soul's full statement, Dora's account, the financial chain, the forgery, documented in side-by-side comparison against North Star's recording logs, corporate registration records, the payment to her mother, contextualized with her mother's statement brief, carefully written, acknowledging what she had known and when. The story did not sensationalize. It did not perform outrage or satisfaction. It laid out what had happened in the language of documented fact and let the facts carry what they carried, which was considerable. By mid-morning, it was the most read piece on North Star's site. By afternoon, 3 other outlets had reached out to confirm details for their own follow-ups. The Ashcombe Group's corporate attorneys issued a statement confirming the forensic audit was underway and that the foundation's operations had been suspended pending its completion. The district attorney's office called North Star's legal team at 4 in the afternoon. And somewhere in the hours between the story running and the phone beginning to ring, Genevieve sat at her desk at North Star and felt something she had not felt in a long time, the specific clean exhaustion of a thing completed. Not the exhaustion of ongoing management, but the exhaustion of an ending, the weight of something finished setting down into stillness. Doug came by her desk at 5:30 and put a coffee in front of her and said, "Good peace." From Doug, that was everything. She went home, the penthouse, which she had stopped thinking of as Alistair's penthouse, and had begun thinking of simply as home, which was its own quiet landmark, and she found him in the kitchen, and they ate dinner at the counter, the way they had fallen into doing, not at the table, just at the counter, with the city below them. And they talked about ordinary things, a book he'd been reading, a source she needed to follow up with on a separate story, the logistics of moving more of her things from her apartment uptown. Ordinary things. She had not had a table of ordinary things in a very long time. Mallory's legal situation resolved over the following months, in the way that legal situations resolve when the documentation is comprehensive and the district attorney's office has sufficient evidence to work with, not quickly, not cleanly, not without the particular grinding difficulty of institutional process, but completely. The stolen charitable funds were identified, and the Foundation's recovery process was initiated under the independent oversight of a new board structure. Mallory did not fight the forensic audit's findings. She had, in the end, enough left of whatever she had started with to understand that fighting was over. Wesley resigned from the Ashcombe Group's associated businesses in the spring and left New York without a press announcement, which was the quietest exit of his life. The letters he sent Genevieve over the following months were real letters, the kind that showed the work of a man understanding something about himself that he had managed not to understand for a long time. She read them. She did not answer them, not because she wished him harm, but because she had learned finally to distinguish between the things that deserved her attention and the things that had already received everything they were going to receive. Her mother began therapy in March. Genevieve knew because her mother told her, which was itself a kind of landmark, her mother telling her something real rather than something managed. It was not reconciliation. Splitting. It was the beginning of a process that neither of them had a map for, and they moved through it slowly and with the particular caution of people who have been careless with each other and are trying to learn a different way. Her father took longer. Her father was built for the management of surfaces, and the language of real things came to him with difficulty. But he came to the penthouse for dinner twice in the spring, and both times he stayed longer than he had planned. And the second time he left, he paused in the doorway and looked at Genevieve in a way that said the thing he still did not have the words for. She let that be enough. Theodore Ashcombe attended both dinners. Theodore, who had sat at the head of that ballroom table for 31 years, and had made a cowardly calculation, and had said so plainly, and then had gotten on with the business of correcting it, turned out to be, when you got him, away from the formal architecture of the family's social structure, a man who laughed at specific things and had opinions about books, and who looked at his granddaughter across a dinner table with an expression that was not performing anything at all. She had not known him that way before. She was glad to know him now, even late, even imperfectly. The wedding was in September, on a Saturday. They held it on the Hudson River, on the property of a friend of Theodore's, who had offered the space with the understanding that it was going to be a small thing, and that small things were sometimes the most important things. The light came off the water in the particular way of late September afternoons, more gold than summer, the light of a season that knows it is not permanent and has decided to be beautiful about it. There were no cameras beyond the one belonging to a friend of Petra's who had been asked to document it quietly. There were no business associates, no executives, no investors. There were 17 people, which was the number that resulted when Genevieve had written down everyone she actually wanted there, and stopped when the list stopped. Theodore sat in the front row beside Petra, who had flown from London and who had spent the boat ride from the dock to the ceremony site, giving Alistair a sustained and detailed assessment of what would happen if he was not, in fact, as good as he appeared to be, which he had received with the specific patience of a man who understood that this was love in a different form. The ceremony was short because Genevieve had written it herself, and she wrote the way she did everything without excess, without performance, without anything that wasn't earned. When the officiant asked Alistair if he took Genevieve using the language she had written, which was plain language, the language of genuine intention rather than ceremony, he looked at her and said yes, with the directness of a man who had been certain about this particular thing for 3 years, and was simply now saying it out loud. And when the officiant asked Genevieve, she looked back at him, at this man, who had picked up the phone and canceled his plans and stood beside her in front of 300 strangers and written a document designed to give her the power to leave, and she felt none of the things she had expected to feel in this moment on the various occasions she had imagined it over the years. She felt clear. She felt, for the first time in her adult life, entirely located in the moment she was in, rather than managing her way through it toward something she hoped was coming. "I do," she said. She meant both words equally. Afterward, they stood at the water's edge while the 17 people moved toward the long table that had been set on the grass. The light was doing what September light does, and the river was doing what rivers do, which is move without stopping, which is continue. Alistair looked at her. "Any regrets?" he said. Not anxiously. He asked it the way he asked most things, directly, willing to hear whatever the answer was. She thought about it, honestly, because he deserved honesty, and she had decided to be the kind of person who gave it. "One," she said. He waited. "I should have put down the ledger sooner," she said. "The one I kept for 7 years. I carried it so long I forgot it wasn't load-bearing." She looked at the river. "I thought if I put it down something would collapse." It turned out the only thing that collapsed was the habit of carrying it. He was quiet for a moment. "What did you do with it?" he said. "When you put it down." She thought about the bridal suite and the text message, and the phone call she had never expected to make, and the 6 weeks that had followed, and the investigation, and the ballroom, and all the various painful and clarifying and irreversible things that had happened in the space between that morning and this one. "Turned it into a story," she said. "That's what I do." He looked at her with the expression she had finally stopped cataloging and simply accepted as the expression she was going to see across tables and counters and morning coffees for a long time. "Yes," he said, "it is." Behind them, Petra called something she chose not to hear clearly, and Theodore laughed at whatever it was, and the 17 people who were supposed to gathered themselves toward the evening. And Genevieve Ashcombe stood beside the Hudson River in September light and understood not as a principle, not as a lesson she had extracted from suffering, but as a plain fact about her own life that she had stopped waiting. And the life she had chosen had come to meet her exactly there.